curiosity and passion for people, first of all. So if it's not in your DNA,
Hey everyone, I'm Joel Primack, the host of the Community-Led Growth Show. Today I'm joined by Vasil Azarov, founder of Growth Blazers and co-creator of Community Hacked. Thanks for being on the show today, Vasil.
yeah, absolutely. Thanks for having me, Joel. Super excited to be here.
Great. Well, let's give our listeners a quick 30-second intro of yourself, please.
Yeah, sure. So we're talking about community today, and ever since I remember myself, I was always passionate about bringing people together. I was drawn to what makes them tick and collaborate and click together. So I was always passionate about events. Now I'm a founder of Growth Blazers, global community for modern marketers and growth leaders, sharing actionable advice and practices for sustainable business growth and career growth. And one of the big things that at the core of our community is to make Silicon Valley strategies that are currently used by some of the largest brands and some of the fastest growing companies accessible to anyone globally. So our community is global. Previously, my team and I produced over 500 virtual and in-person events. One of the most prominent ones was Growth Marketing Conference. And I'm also learning from some of the best community builders as a part of a new collective, which I'm co-creator of, called Community Hacked, where community builders sharing engagement and growth tactics on a monthly basis.
Wonderful. That's awesome. Thanks so much for sharing. On that note of community building, when you see and you're meeting people, especially through Community Hacked and Growth Blazers, what are some traits and characteristics that make a strong community builder?
Yeah, absolutely. I think about it a lot. I think the first characteristic that comes to mind is really curiosity and passion for people, first of all. So if it's not in your DNA, I would probably not recommend choosing community building as your career. Like, for example, I meet a lot of very technical growth marketers on the daily basis in Growth Blazers who are great at what they do. But one of the traits of a community builder to be able to be good at storytelling, right? To be able to communicate clearly, also to be very resourceful, um, meaning that in many cases you have to execute with very limited resources, sometimes with no budget at all. So really understanding and prioritizing accordingly. In some cases, you need to take risks and just go all in and triple down on the strategy. In some cases, you need to take a step back and strategically evaluate the playing field to see where you need to place these bets, especially given the fact that you have limited resources. Where else? I would say also dot connector. Being able to broker various partnerships and really understand your community members or some goals and help them achieve those goals, which is brings me back to curiosity and being around people and enjoying doing that.
Yeah, no, that all makes a lot of sense, especially in terms of how you go from growing a community to then really working with people and expanding that and showing the value that it provides. You have to understand the pains and the troubles that people are going through to then be able to help and provide resources, connections, etc., to those people so they see the value of being a member.
Yeah, absolutely.
So you just shared a little bit ago that you and your team had done about 500 events between in-person and virtual. So you're kind of an expert in this field, I would say. And I would ask, what have you found has been either the strategy or some insights that you'd be willing to share around events-based community growth? Because that's very different than some other types of community growth that maybe are just solely Slack based or Discord based, that are really just a space for people to connect, ask questions, drop resources, be super helpful, but they're just two very different types of community.
Yeah, so the way I view online communities, they're more about identity, about who you are, about the sense of belonging, about some common beliefs and values that you have. Yes, there's some utility to it, like valuable resources and conversations that you're having. But at the events, that's where I feel where uh, all of the dots are getting connected. This is where the magic really happens. The events are all about orchestrating that experience. It's not about just writing people being there, but also them being there with a specific goal that they're trying to accomplish within the constrained time of the event. Plus, at the event, especially if it's in person, you're able to, there are all of the senses activated, and you're able to meet with people in person, share a meal, have a conversation, and talk about something that you have in common beyond, just maybe professional work. So I would say the secret to building event-based community is to really, first of all, understanding community members' goals, and then creating an event that relates to these specific goals. And what we usually do leading up to all of the events, which I know that many of community member organizers do it afterwards, they conduct focus groups and surveys, right? And this is actually what I learned from community builders. When you have onboarding survey as soon as the member join, this is something that we do for the events. We organize focus groups to understand what kind of experience you would like to receive at the events, right? What would be a win for you? So you show up, you actually attend, not just to learn, but what kind of people you would meet. So another thing to mention, and this relates to both in-person and virtual experiences, is that we think about, at Growth Blazers, we think about event as a product. At the very core foundation is your goals and the environment that you're trying to create for the community members when they get together. Meaning that, for example, if it's a small, very intimate event, you're not going to host it at the soccer stadium, right? If your audience are, let's say, marketing executives, you're not going to host it at the co-working startup place. And so those little things, they make a huge difference. And this is all boils down to that experience that you create for your members, right? And everything else is secondary, meaning like recruiting your high profile speaker, which is important, recruiting sponsors, recruiting partners, doing all of the marketing. This is all that is secondary. Afterward, you created that concept of the event. After you identifying the main goals for your community and what are you trying to achieve also for yourself as a either event organizer, community builder, what are your business goals, what are your engagement goals, growth goals, community goals in general. So yeah, and finally, when everything comes together on the very top, is creating that impactful experience at the event so it's memorable and the event doesn't end. You have to have the strategic plan what's going to happen afterwards, and that's where the connection to community is so important. So the conversation continues within the community, and events that are happening, they're amplifying that energy that's been created.
Yeah, I would also say that it can go further in terms of and be a growth lever for the events itself. Kind of like what you were just talking about, if the experience and the content match and exceed the expectations of people who were in attendance, then they may become your best advocates for sharing it with their peers who may in the future weren't able to attend that event, but maybe now would be able to attend given scheduling and some other things now that they kind of have social proof from a peer that this is super valuable. And oh my gosh, that person and that person who are marketing executives who are great in their space are also going to be attendance. Like that's something I need to be at too, not just, oh, I'll see if I can go if it works for my calendar. It becomes like a need versus a want. So I really think that creating that whole experience really helps drive that type
And
of
you know what, on that note,
feeling.
very quickly, you need to figure out your secret sauce, either as a community builder or event organizer. In some cases, it would be people in your network. You still need some content to bring them together, but if you have the right people and you just bring them together in the right environment, you don't really need to do anything. In some cases, it could be a thought leadership content that people would consume online, and regardless whether you might think it's a boring webinar, they would actually show up to see a relevant, very relevant session. That's why it's so important to have conversations with your community members to understand exactly what is top of their mind. And in some cases, it could be just a very unique experience where marketers don't talk about marketing. Let's say they all love soccer and they decided to plan a trip to Brazil for the World Cup. Like this is how we did one of the mixers that was very successful back in the days for founders. So this is a completely different experience, not work related. But if you figure out that secret sauce and be very consistent to it and know that this is something that creates that magic when you bring people together, those I feel the best communities and events that I ever been a part of, that being consistent with that experience.
That's a great point. I think that that's something that can sometimes be overlooked at times or just not ever thought of at times too. So I love the idea of pairing the experience as part of that secret sauce for your event strategy, and therefore it fuels the growth and feeling of community because everybody's in it experiencing the same thing and like having those same experiences together, and therefore they're connected, they're having those same feelings and feeling great. In terms of now shifting a little bit, so you mentioned partners and sponsors for your events. So how best have you found it to structure strong partnerships, even though you may have a scrappy budget? Maybe you're just starting out with events and trying to build a community. So people are willing to give you like a little test budget, but they need to see an ROI from it to then be able to say, here's more budget, go run with this.
Yeah, absolutely. So this has been quite a journey, quite a learning journey over the course of the last 5 years. So I'll try to distill it in some actionable key lessons right now. So one of them would be really think about your key focus and priority very strategically, especially if you're starting out as a very small team, small community. Let's say you don't have thousands of community members that you can leverage as a big audience to present to the sponsor to secure their budget. So there are a couple of things that you can do. One of them is really build a relationship and treat it not as a sponsorship, but more like a partnership. And what we do at Growth Blazers, for example, we don't have a salesperson who just doing all of the sales of the sponsorships and then hand it off to customer success, so to speak, to execute. Actually, our salesperson, her official title, she's great, by the way, shout out to Sabrina. So her official title is Head of Partnerships and Customer Advocacy. So she, during the first meeting with our partners, not only she goes over deliverables, timelines, and everything else, but really trying to understand what are their goals, who are their target personas, and almost be an extension of their marketing team. Of course, if you go into that level of detail, you won't be able to take 10, 20 different sponsors of the get-go, especially given that you resource strapped on board. But my recommendation is to really start small. And even if you don't have a large audience, large community, if you have a niche community, if you have your core, leverage your team, leverage your sources to provide a personalized attention to the partner. and treat your partners as community members in a way, because in many cases, we don't have that relationship when the partners within the community are trying to sell to community members. In fact, we don't even have sponsorships for our community. We keep communities separate. We have sponsorships for the events. So we encourage sponsors to join the community and just be there. And we actually don't encourage sales professionals to join, because the community is for marketers. So we encourage, even though we work with demand gen teams, field marketing teams, we encourage their marketers to join the community. But the key is really to start small, provide personal attention to your early supporters and believers, and under promise, over deliver, and try to build a really long-term relationship. So we started by trying to recruit in as many sponsors as possible for our events. And now we are focusing on building relationship only maybe with handful partners, but really working with them very closely. So they almost treat us as the extension of their team. But switching gears a little bit, because it might not be relevant to somebody is to a completely new community that, let's say, Joel, you've founded a new community and it's just you, right? You don't have a budget to hire a head of partnerships. You don't have marketing team to execute on everything. So think about it. The way I think about partnerships in general is there's not only money that being exchanged. There is money, there is brand, there is audience, and there is also your time, the work that you actually do. So what we've noticed in many communities that are, or many brands that sponsor us right now at the moment, the usually Series A, Series B company who recently raised funds and they focus on events right now, they very much resources strapped. It takes them a while to hire a person. So I could be like almost that person working with them. At the same time, I want to make sure that we position it in a way so we are still vendor agnostic, but structuring the right partnership, you can actually put the hours of work into providing value to partners. If you don't have a brand, that's how we start. Then when you have a minimum viable audience, you can connect your audience to potential partners. Then eventually you build brand, and it becomes sort of a snowball down the road. If you're doing it consistently, your community grows, your events get better. But from the very beginning, be very strategic with your time, choose the right partners. Also, one of the things, if anything to spend your money on, spend the money on the right positioning and branding. I would spend probably 80% of the budget that I have for the year for the new community on building a professional looking website that builds trust, right? Because this is how you're being judged in the first 30 seconds by a potential sponsor.
That's a great piece. I never even really thought about it. And I'm sure lots of people are really going to be evaluating very, very carefully now what their website shows, how it looks, how it feels, and kind of what it also then evokes in the minds of their target audience. So I love that piece at the end. Thank you so much for sharing that.
You cannot, in 2022, you cannot afford to have a 1990s website. It's just not acceptable, especially if you in our industry.
That's very true, especially also I'll add, if you're marketing to marketers.
Yes.
It's
Which
just
is the toughest audience to market to.
We have good eyes. Our eyes are built for attention to detail and everything, because that's the world we live in every day. So definitely would agree with that. In terms of, you have your events, you mentioned that you actually keep the community separate from the events in terms of sponsorships and partnerships. So how best have you found it for your sponsors and partners to really show the ROI? Because I feel like that's something that can be a struggle with for some organizations and community leaders. of like proving the value of here's what you put in, here's what you're getting out, and what do those deliverables either look like? How do you guys best show that they achieved their goals through this partnership together?
Yeah, absolutely. And this is something that what we're trying to do, again, going back to building strong relationships with your core partner network, is really, it's about having quarterly lunches with them and really understanding, um, are they getting what they want from us currently, right? How we can improve, not just doing it at the very end, but doing it consistently. And of course, so the way, like, we by surveying the existing pool of partners, we realized here's what they want. At least here's what they wanted 4 months ago: is highly targeted leads. They want speaking sessions at the events, and they want to be able to connect with the people who actually attend the sessions, whether as a part of the virtual summit or it's a dedicated mixer or webinar, right? Some of them, they would like just in general to have a stronger brand awareness, especially if it's a part of their go-to-market strategy. When somebody raised a big round, they want to just be everywhere. They want to be seen as a leader of category in the category. But ultimately, it's all about, boils down to the revenue, the deals closed at the end of the year. So the worst type of partnerships that we had, and would be the ones that would just sign a contract, maybe even skip onboarding session with our head of partnership, and then eventually like get the list of registrants, and without talking through with us on the best practices of using them, of being in touch with them, just throwing it into sales pipeline and funnel and like cold outreach sequence, and then not seeing any results, and eventually, of course, not renewing the partnership. So what we encourage to do is really uh, working with us to help us build a persona, identifying the right people within the community. So it doesn't really feel, when we make that connection or introduction, it doesn't feel like selling, right? Also, really focusing on providing valuable content at our event. So our core focus is really having that content delivered by practitioners, the content that is cutting edge that you usually wouldn't see on YouTube. So we really work very closely with our partners to design the presentations that they have at the events. In some cases, we would not recommend maybe a CEO to speak all the time and give sort of a spiel and leadership keynote. In some cases, it's better to bring a successful customer and give them the floor so they can explain not how they use the software to achieve the success, but rather, and for example, we just got a request from a community member who's struggling with activation, right? So we got that feedback, and I'm going to reach out to one of our partners who's doing product tours in conversation about designing their presentation. So we're taking that feedback from community members, and then we sort of incorporating it in the speaking presentation at the event. So we know that at least one person, potential client, would be there listening, right? So it requires very hands-on approach, and you need to juggle a lot of things, connect a lot of dots. That's why I think the most important skill, going back to community builder, is really being able to connect the dots and have someone whose brain works almost like CRM in a way. So I've met you, I understand your goals, and then they kind of stored in the back of my mind. And as soon as I meet another person, it just clicks, right? And then you have to make that introduction. You have to make that connection. You have to amplify it. You have to create that valuable session at your event, because now you're not having a one-to-one communication channel. You providing a platform when someone can speak to many. So that's where, again, bringing everything back to events, why events are so crucial for the community. For us, for example, Slack and online forums we're using it, but people are not very engaged there. And at first I was very worried about that, like people don't want to engage. And I thought, oh, okay, so community is not working out. But then we sent an NPS software survey, and we got great responses. And what we learned by just talking to our members, they're too busy to be on Slack and like commenting. Yeah, so something that the most valuable is really those connections. When they understand who people are, they reaching out to them one-on-one, they connecting with people at the events, they reaching out to our growth experts. And the next step is really based on the feedback. What we're seeing is in-person events as they coming back, because this is really our DNA, when all of the best connections are happening and all of the deal making is happening. So I'm super excited about that next hybrid chapter that is upon us in 2022.
Yeah, well, you just mentioned hybrid models of communities. So would you mind elaborating on that? What do you envision for that to look like? How do you, and what are you guys planning for? Acro Blazers, not necessarily your secret sauce, but just a little bit of like insights of how you guys are all thinking about it.
Yeah, I can give the secret sauce, no problem, because I
I'll
think
take the secret sauce.
because I feel that for every single community it's different. Again, going back to really understanding who you are, what is your core, what are you the most passionate about, and really knowing your members. For us, I know that having very intimate in-person events, like for about 30 to 40 people, in some cases maybe even smaller, those are the ones where we always get the highest positive feedback from, even though we've done events for 2000, almost 2000 people, our largest in-person conference back in the days. But so the feedback that we've been getting, going back to hybrid, is in many cases the content is here to stay in the online uh, sort of form. And again, if somebody really wants to see a specific session, uh, if they're just there to learn, there's a higher chance that they would go and attend a virtual summit or webinar, virtual workshop, than they would buy $2,000 ticket, fly to across the states to attend the conference. But that being said, nothing can beat in-person connections. And this is where, again, the magic happens. So the best events, in my opinion, would be the one that combine both, right? That would be industry, big events, that they're not going away anywhere. They're not going away anytime soon. But what I think where the most underrated area where community builders can be focusing on right now is really creating those local, hyper local in-person events with relevant members. And again, if in your DNA is in-person events, if you're a people person, if your community and your team really love meeting people, this is our strategy for the next year, activating our community members using small events in small hubs, working with our partners to help support these initiatives, and still delivering content quarterly in the virtual environment using our actionable virtual summits experience.
That's wonderful. And I love that strategy of kind of combining the best of both worlds through the strategy of a hybrid model that you just shared with us. So thank you so much. Last question before we wrap up. What advice would you give to someone who's just starting out to build a community today?
Yeah, so I would give so I'll give two. So one of them would be to start very small and really nail down your concept, your key differentiation. What is the core? It could be the niche community by design, meaning, let's say, community B2B marketers who are focusing on account-based or product-led approach, but you can even drill it down deeper than that, much deeper. But it also could be, okay, we're going to do all of our events in person. We're going to have a very specific format, or we're going to have like wine club for marketers or something like that, right? That Well, this is just one of the ideas, to really
Yeah.
start very small and potentially identifying something that people love to do, in addition to their professional sort of day-to-day responsibilities.
Yeah.
So starting small. And another advice that I would give, pay attention right now what is happening with Web3 and communities that right now are popping out in crypto primarily. But I'm have been learning about it in the last couple of weeks. So I'm taking a deep dive right now. I'm very much a beginner, but the whole concept of members being sort of owners of the community, like the concept of DAO, is fascinating to me right now. And I wouldn't be surprised that all of the communities 5 years from now will have that concept, decentralized concept, embedded into them. So I'm really paying a very close attention to it. And as a part of the community hacked, we actually have an idea of really utilizing that concept and potentially even turning it into DAO. So I'll keep you posted how it goes.
Yeah, I'm sure we'd all love to hear in maybe like a year or so, like what's going on with that and how you guys all navigated it and where it's at today. But like I said, I know that we're coming up on time. So Vasil, again, thank you so much for being on the community-led growth show. If people want to follow or connect with you after listening to this episode, what are the best channels and or handles for them to use?
Yeah, so the best would be to connect with me on LinkedIn, and also check out Growth Blazers and Community Hacked. I think community growth leaders would find it valuable.
Wonderful. Thank you so much and have a great day.
Thank you, Joel.